Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Snowfall News. This week I got something a little different for you. We're going to be talking about the State of Play, our favorite time of the year. So, if you might not know about it, State of Play is Sony's version of Nintendo Directs, in which they give updates about games developed for the console, and at times, not even direct partners with Sony themselves. So it's kind of an interesting time seeing these. They've been popping up more and more since the end of E3. Microsoft has their own version of it, obviously, and a lot of other studios are kind of having their own in-house versions of Nintendo Directs when they have a bunch of games to announce. Now, generally speaking, I kind of find these a bit lackluster. The lineups are not usually all that good, and this one followed that trend in some ways, but, there were some interesting parts to mention, so I'll talk about it and give highlights of stuff I particularly find worth talking about or particularly interesting. Why don't we go ahead and get into that, shall we? We'll go ahead and start about the overview. So for the most part, the State of Play was focused on follow-ups to February's broadcast, which essentially featured more in-depth looks at some of the lineups they announced then. Games that go with new announcements or scheduled release dates included Tomb Raider, Legacy of Atlantis, which is a remake of the original Tomb Raider from 1996. Gameplay in it was aimed to be more faithful to the original than the Tomb Raider reboot series, which had a bigger emphasis which has a bigger emphasis on puzzle solving. Now, I've never actually played a Tomb Raider game myself, but it looked a lot more promising than the ones developed by Crystal Studios, which was sort of like the reboot series, and those were definitely much more kind of survival, kind of almost, I want to say Uncharted-esque, but this one was much more closer to the roots of Tomb Raider, and it has a release date of February 12th, 2027. After that, Silent Hill Townfall also got a release date, the next brand new title in the survival horror series. I was quite impressed by the environments and atmosphere in this one, although some of the character models looked a little outdated. The little lighting was a bit weird. I don't know. I didn't quite like them, especially compared to the downright horrifying monster designs. Those just look a lot better to me. Like they looked much, like I said, more light. They kind of popped more. I didn't really like that dichotomy. But this one's coming up in September 24th, and it's sure to probably be a pretty good game. Silent Hill has had a bit of a winning streak recently between Silent Hill F and the Silent Hill 2 remake. So I'm excited to see what they can do next. I have pretty high expectations for this one. Then came Onimusha Way of the Sword, the next mainline installment in the Onimusha series. Action-adventure game that is kind of like the sister series to Resident Evil. For that one, got all famous and became too big for its reaches. It features much more of action combat, and I believe it has some ties also to Devil May Cry, although Resident Evil always had as well. So this is probably one of the games I'm most looking forward to, and it has a release date of September 25th, with the demo being out now. I'll probably play that at some point as well. Continuing the Control series comes Control Resident, which shifts the series away from being a purely third-person shooter to being a full-on action RPG, and one that takes a lot of inspiration from character action rather than Souls-like, which I tend to enjoy more myself. Look pretty good, I'm being honest here. The game had some pretty interesting elements to it. It seemed like it had a real combo structure, which a lot of these games made by Western devs kind of lack sometimes. I don't know why, but the game's releasing on September 24th. I wonder if you're seeing a pattern here at this point. Following that, we have the latest in the game series, incredibly invested in Ace Combat 8, Wings of Thieves, which continues the high-flying melodrama that I personally just can't get enough of. They had shown a teaser trailer last time, and the series has had a bit of a revival since Ace Combat 7 was a major hit. And since then also, they've had a number of games kind of try to copy it a bit and, kind of sort of do some iteration on the formula. Like I know there's one called Project Wingman. But Ace Combat, I think, still kind of takes the cake for me. It's kind of a place in my heart. And it seems like this one especially has a bigger emphasis on the world and story, which I think are not spoken about parts of Ace Combat. Is the lore is quite extensive, and that's also gotten some traction lately. So that game's coming out on October 2nd. The last time they spoke about a new action RPG by the creators of Ori and the Blind Forest called No Rest for the Wicked. If I ever saw a game that was kind of a heel turn from the past projects, it's definitely this. they're making a sort of co-op action RPG that they specifically stated was Souls-like. Like in the presentation, the person said it was supposed to be Souls-like, which I don't know if I've heard that before. By the devs themselves saying that. Usually it's just a thing that, people give the game, but it's crazy. It's dark fantasy, and compared to, a lot of the other games, they were hitting a lot of buzzwords like that. And they also said at one point it had over 100 hours of content, including endgame. It's like a concern a lot of gamers have these days. And, it's like a particular thing. It's very funny to me to see them mention it directly. But, it might be worth keeping an eye on, I think. It at least looked pretty interesting. It kind of was like a mix of, like I said, something like Diablo, but not as, stiff. Having more action-y elements to it. Very interesting. Very interesting game, that. I'm actually kind of curious to see it, even though I usually wouldn't play games like that. I'm kind of interested in trying it, at least. Next up was Marvel Tokon. They announced the final, team for the game. And this time it's all villains. Coming to the roster will be Magneto, Carnage, and the Green Goblin, who will all be led by Doctor Doom in the team Knights of Doom. I actually kind of love this team. Might be my favorite one so far. Ironically enough, I feel as if both Carnage and Green Goblin just kind of get thrown to the wayside whenever Spider-Man is involved, which is criminal considering I thought Green Goblin was supposed to be his main rival, but whatever. Speaking of Marvel, actually, Marvel's Wolverine had gotten some new gameplay too, and I can't help but think it looked kind of lackluster, which is strange, because I feel as if licensed games recently have been getting a lot of love, but I just can't I can't find much to be excited about here. There's some cool tech with some of the blood system, like it had a particular system with that, but it felt kind of generic, a little uninspired. Maybe the previews will be a bit more kinder to it, but who knows. Last, they had given a release date for Phantom Blade Zero, which is a Chinese wushu action game by a Chinese developer. Honestly, it looks a bit better than my first impression of the game. A lot of the action games coming from China can be a little similar sometimes, especially in the art direction, and it did not seem to impress me much in that either. But at least it seemed satisfying, and it managed to pique my interest, so we'll see how that one goes. And that is it for all the updates, and now I'll go into the brand new games from the State of Play. Now, you definitely noticed that there is a lot of updates, and you'd be correct because that was most of the show. There's only a couple of new games here and there, and I'll only be talking about the ones that I particularly found interesting or worth mentioning. So we'll go into the game that we'll first go into a game that I thought was really interesting, which was Ill. This is a survival horror game, but rather than the much more slow-paced, dread-filled take done by Silent Hill and games like Resident Evil 1 and 2, this one takes after Resident Evil 4, which is to say, you're slicing, you're dicing, you're blasting, you're shooting, and you're killing all these, horrible monstrosities that you come across. Definitely, a different take compared to the direction a lot of games, even like indie games, have taken in now, where they're doing more of the survival horror part of it. So it's pretty interesting to see a developer who's much more interested in going after the action part of it, because I personally enjoy that more. A lot of my friends, enjoy the slower paced ones, and I do like it, but I like blasting bad guys, alright? Now, it takes some heavy sci-fi elements, and, like I said, it was kind of the star of the show for me. The protagonist was making a few quips and stuff there, and, that kind of showed me that they're really wearing their influences on their sleeve, right? Like, where they're getting their ideas from, so. Very interested to see their take on it. No release date, but I'll be checking up on updates for it, so. After that, they announced Kamuri, which is a supernatural action game set in the fictional city of Kamuri City, made by the Tokyo-based game studio Unseen. It was announced by Ikumi Nakamura, who you may remember as she had like a meme, like she was doing like this pose on stage. She was very high energy, she was like very cute. This was like in 2019, something like that. And during E3, she just kind of became like kind of a little bit of a meme. And it seems like she's kind of came back and she made her own studio. It's pretty wild. So, and this game was kind of like I said, kind of like a supernatural action game. Had some interesting elements to it. I don't particularly like this art style. I don't know. The like kind of Neo-Japan, cyberpunk. I don't know. I've never been a big fan of that art style personally. But the gameplay looks kind of cool. and it's another co-op game on top of that, so this is going to be her first game as a director. She's been mostly doing art in the space, so it'll be interesting to see how she takes in this change of role, because it's a pretty big jump, I think. Granted, there are some other directors who do that. Like, I'm pretty sure Nomura started out as a art person and then he moved into directorial work, so there at least is a precedent for it, right? Then Until Dawn is getting a sequel after nearly 10 years. The original was something of a cult hit. Sales and reception of the game were a lot better than Sony itself had anticipated. That's another horror game. Its claim to fame was its rather extensive decision-based gameplay, where every single player character in the story could live or die, depending on choices made by the player. And that kind of extensive branching decision tree is actually exceptionally rare in gaming, and it made it stand out quite a bit from the rest of the narrative-focused games. It seemed that Until Dawn 2 is, for the most part, keeping a lot of those aspects without adding too much from what I saw. Still though, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And then to cap it all off, they brought out the big guns, God of War Lao Fei, which is the next mainline entry in the series. So I haven't played any of those games, so I can't comment too much on the story, but it takes place in what they call the afterlife of the gods, and it follows a character named Fei as she tries to return to the world of living. What I found particularly interesting, though, is that it's continuing the trend of God of War New, in which it tries to bring in other mythologies into the series. And this time they featured a character who seemed to be from a Mongolian god, it seemed like, and then they had an Egyptian god. Very deep pulls, that one. I didn't expect to see a Mongolian one of all. It's very interesting. And then the combat was a lot better, or more interesting, I guess, compared to the original one. They were doing air combos and stuff, which is something that the original God of War game seems to have as well, so probably a bit more emphasis on that too this time. And that was all of the games that I found particularly interesting at the presentation. But as you can see, it's pretty clear based on the release dates for a lot of these games that everyone is kind of downright terrified of Grand Theft Auto 6. 4 of the games that were announced are coming out on the same 2 days, on the 24th and the 25th of September. And everything that's not that is trying to hit a release date in either September or October. That's just how much they don't want to step on the toes of who is likely the biggest kid in the industry. And it's almost as funny as it is a little frustrating for anyone who actually wants to play all these games. Granted, I don't think it changes that fact that there wasn't really much new stuff here today. It's nice getting release dates and finding out more about these games that they discussed, but I don't know, there wasn't really a slam dunk or a big hit or, generating a lot of hype here. You would have thought that something with a lot of hype behind it, like the new Final Fantasy game, or I don't know, even maybe returning a new IP would have really got people excited here, but it was just kind of absent. There wasn't really much there. Maybe Sony just isn't really trying to get people to pay attention to these that much, or maybe they're trying to really make a splash, but a little disappointing, at least for me anyway. I guess I'll have to see where a lot of these games go, and maybe we'll get more games come some of the state of plays towards the end of the year when 2027 is closer. So we'll see that decided. But anyway, that's going to be this week's Snowfall news. We'll be back again, of course, as always, more stories next week. Hopefully on time as well. So I will see you guys then. Bye, guys.